Charge! To victory or death!
I didn't believe it at first. Just 80 men, how could they possibly stop the Mongols? The same Mongols who swept through China like wildfire, who crushed Korea under their heel. It sounded more like a myth whispered over campfires than real history. But the deeper I dug, the more I found myself pulled into the silence between the lines of old texts. The Hachiman Gudokun, a Japanese chronicle, told one version. The Yuan Shi, official Mongol records, confirmed another. Both spoke of a single battle, fought on the island of Tsushima in November 1274. And at the heart of it all, not thousands of defenders, not imperial battalions, but 80 samurai on horseback. It was impossible, and yet, it happened. It made no sense, unless the island itself had chosen to fight, unless the land had become a weapon, and unless those men, flesh and blood like me, had become something more when history called. The Mongols didn't wake one morning and decide to cross the sea. Their eyes had turned toward Japan years earlier. As early as 1268, they were building ships not for trade, but for conquest. But this was not their element. The Mongols were creatures of the open steppe, born in saddles, not at sea. So they leaned on their tributaries, especially Korea. The Koreans supplied more than just boats. They brought sailors, supplies, even their own soldiers. By the time the invasion fleet was ready, it was monstrous. 15,000 warriors from the Mongol Empire, northern China, the Khitan, and the Jurchen. Add to that 6,000 to 8,000 Korean foot soldiers, and over 7,000 Korean seamen navigating the armada. They carried with them the latest tools of terror, catapults that hurled fire, arrows laced with poison, shields of rawhide, and strange black spheres that hissed and exploded. It was an army from another world, and it was coming. Against this tidal wave, Japan had no national army, no central command, no emperor's legion waiting in polished armor. What we had were pockets of warriors, local samurai, bound by loyalty more than law. It was called the Shoin system, feudal estates, each with their own defenders. When war threatened, each lord summoned his own men. That was our patchwork shield. But there was one man who saw the storm coming. Hojo Tokimune. Though not emperor, he held real power, and he didn't wait. He ordered the western island of Kyushu to brace for war. Around Hakata Bay, his men built walls like Japan had never seen, stone barriers stretching for miles, strong enough to stop even siege engines. It was a colossal effort, one born not of experience in war, but of the fear of annihilation. Because the question wasn't if the Mongols would strike, it was where and when. The answer came from the sea, a small island in the Tsushima Strait. Tsushima, barely a speck on the map, stood between Korea and Kyushu. It was the first landfall for any invading fleet. And so it became the first target. The island's governor, So Sukakuni, was young, but not blind to what was coming. He counted his force, 80 mounted samurai, and around 300 islanders, most of them fishermen, not fighters. But what they lacked in numbers, the land made up for. Tsushima was all jagged coastlines and steep, unforgiving mountains. There were no roads to retreat, no open fields for cavalry, but there were narrow trails, thick forests, and cliffs that overlooked the sea like stone sentinels. Sukakuni understood. This island wouldn't be defended by force alone. It would be defended by every rock, every shadow, every drop of blood they could give. And so they prepared not to survive, but to make their deaths count. We turned the island into a trap. On the highest cliffs, we built watch posts where eyes never slept. Each man knew his role. When a Mongol ship appeared, A signal torch would light, and then another, and another, cascading along the ridgelines like fire racing through dry leaves. It was faster than any messenger on horseback. In the forests, archers dug in, camouflaged among branches. Villagers, once goat herders and fishers, led us through hidden paths, narrow enough for one man at a time, paths that twisted and vanished like streams in the dark. We filled the mountain passes with spike pits, disguised under leaves. We rolled giant logs, thick as temple pillars, into place ready to thunder downhill. Every corner of Tsushima was reborn, no longer home, but battlefield. We didn't wait for the enemy to come. We waited to swallow them whole. Then, on November 4th, 1274, they came. First, a lone ship entered the bay, a shadow with sails. Then, behind it, masts by the hundreds, rising like a forest of spears. Black and red banners whipped in the wind, and then we heard it, the sound of Korean war drums. So deep and relentless it made the very cliffs tremble beneath our feet. The fleet moved like a beast with many heads. On the flanks were towering Korean warships, dwarfing anything we'd ever seen. At the center were Mongol troop carriers, their decks crammed with armored men. And below, hidden in their bellies, Chinese gunpowder ships the heart of their terror. Their soldiers carried strange black spheres, heavy as coconuts. We didn't yet know what they could do. We only knew they came to conquer. As they formed into a crescent and moved closer to shore, we drew our bows and waited for the signal. It was one arrow, just one, fired from the cliff by Sukani himself. It sliced the air like a whisper before the storm, and then the mountain exploded. Arrows rained down like a sudden storm, blackening the sky. The forest came alive with war cries. Names of ancestors shouted into the wind. From hidden paths, we charged fast, precise, and vanishing before the enemy could react. We hit, retreated, and struck again from another angle. They never saw us twice in the same place. Their tight formations began to crumble, their shields locked, but they faced an enemy that didn't stand still. The Mongols tried to press forward, but every step triggered a trap, a rolling log, a hidden pit, an arrow to the throat. They had crossed an ocean with fire and steel, but now they were inside the jaws of a mountain that fought back. They tried to fight back, but the terrain betrayed them. Their archers couldn't see past the branches. Their cavalry, feared across continents, were useless here. These cliffs had no roads, no space for a gallop, no mercy for a falling horse. And we weren't like them. We didn't fight in blocks or ranks. We split into threes, sometimes twos, striking like lightning, then disappearing into the trees. Every hillside had eyes, every shadow a kill. They marched forward in disciplined steps, long spears raised, trying to close the distance. But we never let them. A group would think they had cornered us, then arrows would whistle from another ridge. Their lines swayed, staggered, then broke. Some panicked. Others stood their ground. But none of them knew where the next blow would come from. And that, more than any weapon, was what began to shake them. By late afternoon, the air stank of sweat, smoke, and shattered bamboo. Our arms were weary. Arrows, once abundant, now clattered empty from hollow quivers. Our shields, rawhide or stolen, were cracked. My sword notched. Blood, ours and theirs, soaked into the earth. And yet, we held. But then I saw the more enemy boats, oars slicing through the bay, paddling toward shore. Reinforcements. If they landed, Tsushima would fall before nightfall. Sukani saw it too. He didn't hesitate. No retreat, no fear. Just one command. Mount up. The final 80, battered and bloodied, climbed onto their horses, not to run, to charge. The sun was dipping low, casting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. We formed a line, quiet, each man nodding once. No grand speeches, no cries of glory, just silence, like men saying farewell without words. And then we rode, down the narrow stretch of sand, hooves hammering like thunder. Ahead stood the Mongol wall, spears bristling, shields locked. We didn't slow. Steel met steel. The crash was like a drumbeat from the underworld. I saw blades flashing, horses buckling, men thrown like dolls. We pierced their ranks, once, twice, then we were surrounded. The sand became a storm of blood and dust. I don't remember how many I struck. I only remember Sukauni still standing, sword gripped in both hands, an arrow buried in his chest. His body swayed, but his spirit held, and the Mongols, stunned by our fury, began to fall back. When the dust settled, the beach was a graveyard. Half our brothers lay still, their armor cracked, their eyes open to the fading sky. I knelt beside a fallen comrade, his fingers still curled around his bow. Sukauni stood a moment longer before his knees gave in, his sword still clenched, death written across his chest like a final oath. But they had done it. We had done it. The Mongols, shaken and disoriented, pulled back toward their ships. Their formations dissolved, their advance halted not by numbers, but by defiance. The sea swallowed them for the night, not as conquerors, but as invaders who had miscalculated the soul of a nation. And above the cliffs, in the encroaching dark, the first fire lit once more, not in battle, but in warning. A blaze that would ignite the sky all the way to Kyushu. We watched from the shadows as their ships rocked gently in the bay, anchored but uneasy. The enemy had chosen not to sleep on land. They feared the forest, feared what it held. So they returned to the sea, to their floating barracks. That choice, that hesitation, became our victory. On the southern tip of Tsushima, our last scouts ignited the final torches. Flames rose high, licking the night sky, visible for miles. Somewhere across the water, on the shores of Kyushu, those fires were seen and understood. Reinforcements would come, walls would be manned, Japan would not be taken easily. But here, on Tsushima, the price had already been paid. Villages smoldered, fields trampled. We had lost more than lives. We had lost homes, names, history. But in doing so, we bought time. And sometimes, time is the sharpest blade of all. By morning, the island smelled of ash and seawater. Smoke curled from burned homes, rising like spirits. We buried our dead in silence, no ceremony, just stones and tears. The Mongols had not taken the island, but they had scarred it. Every path we once walked in peace now carried footprints of war, and yet we endured. What began as a hopeless stand had become a signal to all of Japan. The enemy could bleed. The invincible could be delayed. Our sacrifice echoed beyond Tsushima's cliffs. In Kyushu, warriors stirred. In Kamakura, commands were sharpened. Even across the mountains, monks whispered prayers not of surrender but of defiance. We had not won a battle. We had written a warning, a message carved in blood and fire. This land will not fall quietly. Tsushima didn't win, not in the way victories are counted with flags and cheers. But that wasn't the point. We weren't meant to survive, we were meant to stall, to scream loud enough for the rest of Japan to wake. And we did. Because across the strait, Kyushu was no longer caught off guard. Our flames had lit a fire in every village, every hilltop, every sword still in its sheath. Hojo Tokimune's walls would not stand empty. Samurai from every province began to move. Men who had never met now prepared to fight together. What happened on Tsushima was not a defeat. It was a defiance. We became the line history remembered, the first to face the wave and refuse to be swept away. But this was only the beginning. The Mongols would sail again, pushing onward to the next island, Iki. And there, another 100 samurai stood, waiting to etch their names into history. Each island, each patch of land between sea and sky, became a battleground. What started as conquest for the Mongols was becoming a nightmare, not because of Japan's might, but because of its spirit. I was there on Tsushima, among the fallen and the flame. I remember the silence after the drums, the taste of salt and blood, the way a man holds his sword not for glory, but because there is no one else left. We did not stop an empire, but we made them hesitate. We made them bleed. And in war, sometimes, that is enough to change everything.
Nhưng bình minh này cho ta hy vọng để tiếp tục.